All right, let's pull back the curtain today on how decisions really get made inside our companies and teams. We're going to go way beyond the official meeting minutes and those polished PowerPoint decks to get at the messy human truth of it all. You know the stories. We've all heard them. The official version of how a big decision was made. It's always presented as this monumental effort, full of brilliant strategy, perfect diplomacy, and everyone agreeing in the end. It sounds super impressive, almost heroic, right? But here's the thing, that official story, it's pretty much a myth. And we need to talk about this because what's actually happening behind the scenes is so much more interesting and so much more human than what you'll ever read in a company handbook. It's a powerful mythology that really shapes how organizations work and a lot of the time, how they get stuck. So let's start right there. Let's explore this mythology, that beautifully polished story we all kind of agree to believe about how choices are made, and maybe more importantly, why we believe it. Now, what's so important to get here is that this mythology isn't really about the decision itself. Nope. It's about the story we tell after it's all said and done. It's basically a way to make everything look logical and orderly, even when the decision was actually driven by something, a lot more human, like gut instinct, office politics, or just doing what's easy. Okay, so let's start debunking. We're going to break down some of the most common myths that make up this whole official story. And we can group them into 3 buckets. Myths about the process, myths about the people, and myths about the action that's supposed to happen next. First up, let's talk about the process. The story we tell ourselves is that it's all perfectly rational. Every single choice fits neatly into the grand corporate strategy, it's all governed by clear rules, and of course, it's all based on hard data. But is that what's really going on? Oh, this one is a total classic. We all love to say we're data-driven. But let's be honest, how often is a decision really made on a gut feeling first? Then the data is brought in to make that choice look objective. And if the numbers don't actually support the story we want to tell, they tend to get ignored, or suddenly we need to reevaluate and the decision gets postponed. It's less about investigation and more about justification. Okay, next, let's get into the myths we tell ourselves about the people involved. There's this beautiful idea of a flat, democratic structure, right, where every single person contributes equally and all the big decisions are made by the whole group together. But the truth is, informal hierarchies, they're just natural. In any group of people, some voices are just going to be louder. Maybe it's because of their experience, their charisma, or honestly, just because they're the one willing to actually take responsibility for an outcome. This myth of absolute equality sounds really nice, but pretending these very real, very human dynamics don't exist, that just gets in the way of having an honest conversation. And finally, that brings us to the myths about action. Or, more often, the complete lack of action. There's this huge tendency to treat the decision itself like it's the finish line. We celebrate making the choice, instead of focusing on, actually doing the thing. And this is so crucial. A decision without a clear owner, without a deadline, and without any kind of real accountability, it's not a decision. It's just a conversation that everyone's going to forget about in a week. That gap between making a choice and actually delivering on it, that is where progress goes to die. So this leads to the big question, right? If the reality is so different from the story, why do we all keep playing along? Why do we cling so tightly to these myths about our processes, our people, and our actions when deep down we kind of know they're not the whole truth? Well, the answer is that these myths we've been talking about are really just symptoms of 4 deeper, more fundamental illusions. Think of them as comforting stories we tell ourselves to make the incredibly messy world of working with other people feel just a little bit more manageable. And here they are. First, the illusion of structure. This idea that our plans and procedures are foolproof. Then there's the illusion of role, where we believe our leaders are in total control. The illusion of action, the belief that just making a decision is the same as getting something done. And finally, the illusion of progress, the idea that every decision we make is automatically a step forward. And listen, it's really important to remember this isn't about people being incompetent or weak. This is a very, very human way of coping with the chaos and uncertainty that just comes with trying to get anything done as a group. The problem isn't that these illusions exist. The problem is when we start to believe them so completely that we lose our grip on what's actually happening. So what's the takeaway here? What do you do with all this? Now that we can see past the mythology and the illusions that prop it up, what's the next step? The real danger zone is when the story we're telling ourselves becomes more important than the results we're actually getting. Being an effective leader or even just an effective team member, means you have to understand where decisions really come from, who really owns them, and what it's actually going to take to see them through to the end. And look, this isn't some niche thing that only happens in certain industries. This dynamic plays out absolutely everywhere, from a tiny startup to a massive corporation, from a nonprofit to a government agency. The details might change, but that basic human tendency to create a nice, neat story to cover up a messy reality, that's universal. And just acknowledging it is the first huge step toward making things better. So I'm going to leave you with a question to chew on for your own world, your own team. The first step to making better, more effective decisions isn't some new process or a fancy piece of software. It's just honestly asking, what's the story our organization tells itself? And what's really happening behind the scenes? Because it's only when you can see that gap between the myth and the reality that you can even begin to think about building a bridge between them.